I start? Okay. All right. Again, welcome all, and congratulations for passing this strict security and making it here all the way. My name is Sinan Gökçen. I'm going to try to moderate this panel where we have very valuable, distinguished speakers. This panel is organized as a side event by three organizations: Kolombiya Global Centers, Istanbul, and Marmara Municipalities Union, or Union of Marmara Municipalities, and Helsinki Citizens Assembly. And the title of the event, as you all know, Multilateral Perspectives on the Refugee Issue, Dynamics in and around Turkey. Just to frame the discussion, I would like to say very few words, maybe throw a few questions at the table and to the room for further discussion. As you see in our invitation, we use the term refugee issue rather than refugee crisis because there's this rhetoric almost accepted by all partners, all stakeholders, to call this refugee crisis. But at least we, Helsinki Citizens Assembly, and probably our partners as well, we don't. This is the question: is this a crisis of refugees, or is it an issue created by a crisis, by a war in Syria? So maybe we should also take into consideration a discussion on the terminology that we frequently use, rather than accepting all the terms which are offered to us. Perhaps refugees are not the crisis, but they are a symptom, an outcome of a crisis. So this language may also affect how we approach the matter. So we should perhaps, there's a problem with naming the issue. Because as I try to say, how we name may also affect what kind of solutions we may produce to address them. And Turkey and many of the European Union countries and some other countries as well mostly describe the situation with two terminologies, which is state security perspective plus humanitarian aid perspective. This is another injection of terminology into our discussions. However, perhaps we should look at the issue from a different angle, which is a humanitarian, human security perspective, which we mostly mean to center the individual at the core of the issue and to look at the issues from a human perspective rather than security and other dynamics, which may lead a discussion on individual or collective dignity foremost, and then safety, integrity, all these concepts. So long term, another issue that we have to maybe briefly elaborate in this panel is now the issue is changing its paradigms. It is no longer a temporary matter, but it will be a long-term, mid-term, long-term issue. So we should also adjust our measures, adjust our approach according to this new situation. Most of the refugees who are in Turkey probably will not go back to Syria. So short-term security measures, short-term humanitarian aid measures are not sufficient anymore. We should develop new concepts to address these new challenges. So instead of dealing with the symptoms, we should really look at the core of the issue and then move on from there. Very basically, these are the issues that I would like to put on the floor. And we have very important speakers with us today. First, we will listen to Mr. Aleinikoff. Did I say correctly? As you all know, he's coming from a very high position regarding the refugee issues. He was the UN Deputy High Commissioner for Refugees, and now he's a fellow at the Kolombiya Global Policy Initiative and a visiting professor at the Kolombiya Law School. So with his academic plus field work, he will provide us a picture of the situation. And then we will have Elif Selinay. She is the head of Istanbul Field Office of UN High Commissioner for Refugees. And then we will have the chance to listen to Burcuhan Şener, She is working with Marmara Municipalities Union as international cooperation expert. And finally, Emel Kurma from Helsinki Citizen Assembly. She is a coordinator of the organization. We will hear Helsinki Citizen Assembly perspective and human security perspective from Emel. We have limited time, so to leave more room for Q&A sessions, shall we agree that each speaker has 10-11 minutes max, and I can be very brutal in interrupting, and then we can readjust ourselves according to the remaining time. Okay, Mr. Alex.
Thank you very much, and please do stop me if I go beyond 10 minutes. I can pick up whatever I've left off later. So I've been asked by the organizers to speak more generally about the global context on the refugee situation, and the experts to my left will fill in on the particular situation in Turkey and the Aegean. I think all of you probably in this room are aware that Turkey is now the largest refugee hosting country in the world, 2.7 million refugees. Unimaginable 5 years ago that would be the case. I'm sure you're aware of the EU-Turkish deal. I'll have a few words to say about that. And I think there'll be a lot of discussion on a number of the challenges facing refugees and facing Turkey in terms of assisting refugees. Let me start by saying that the Syrian situation, although that has occupied the headlines in the newspapers for months now, years, the refugee flow from Syria, while the largest in the world now, is not exceptional in terms of the world history of refugee flows. The world has seen flows of this size before. And even in terms of the refugee movements around the world today, there are other large movements of people from South Sudan, Central African Republic, Mali, Northern Nigeria. Others are going on at the same time around the world that get much less press attention. They're not as large, but they raise similar problems. So what we are seeing in the Syrian flow and in Turkey is actually being replicated in many places around the world. So the lessons that we should be thinking about how these relate in terms of a global system of protection. I'll say a bit more about that. I want to make three general points very quickly. The first is, and this picks up on the point that the moderator just made, is the current situation in Turkey takes us beyond simply a humanitarian response. I know we are at the World Humanitarian Summit, but I think one of the important messages here in the Secretary General's report and some of the core commitments and responsibilities is a recognition that humanitarians alone cannot solve the refugee problem. First of all, there are issues of peace and security and how we solve the war in Syria. But even in terms of the refugee response, we now recognize that other actors, development actors, private sector actors, need to be involved in making sure that refugees have a chance at taking care of themselves, self-reliance, inclusion into local processes, education, health, and the like. And that can only come through other actors. Humanitarian actors alone are not able to do that. Related to that is the point that was also made by the moderators. We are now moving into a situation with the Syrians in Turkey and in other hosting countries, what UNHCR refers to as a protracted refugee situation. Most refugees around the world are in protracted refugee situations. The majority of refugees are in protracted situations. UNHCR defines that as 25,000 refugees in refugee status for more than 5 years. That is the norm around the world. Although the newspapers make us think it's the flow in these boats, these horrible stories of deaths in the high seas and people being detained in various places around the world, that actually is not the typical refugee story. The typical refugee story are people sitting as refugees for years, 10, 20, 30 years. That's the majority of UNHCR's work. That's the majority of the refugees around the world. The Syrian situation is becoming that. We are approaching the 5th year of Syrian refugees. Even if there's peace tomorrow in Syria, it's very unlikely that Syrian refugees will return anytime soon because of the destruction in the country. And so we need to grapple then with what we do in protracted situations. Again, this is not something humanitarians alone can do. The typical humanitarian response is to continue to give assistance year after year after year after year, whether it's in Somali camps in Kenya or Afghans in Pakistan, Iran, or Bhutanese in Nepal. All around the world there's a continuation of humanitarian programming. That needs to change, and one of the things I think that the World Humanitarian Summit is putting on the table is a basic change in the way we do programming for these protracted situations. That again means development actors need to be involved, refugees need to be included into local processes, given the right to work, given the chance to take care of their families. That will not happen in hosting states unless there is significant aid to the hosting states from the international community, because the hosting states will say, hey, we've opened our borders, we've brought people in, but it's up to the international community now to help us include them in our processes. Okay, point number 2 on the EU-Turkey deal. Look, the deal is likely to fail. I think that's obvious, that it's not going to be successful for any number of reasons. First of all, the Greek courts and the EU courts are going to stop the returns of people because they'll be, it's a very odd situation. 2.7 million refugees welcomed into Turkey and taken care of by Turkey, and yet it's quite likely under EU law that there'll be determinations that Turkey doesn't meet the requirements that permits return of asylum seekers to Turkey under, as I said, under EU and European law. So you'll probably not have many returns of Syrians back, which of course is at the core of the deal. Secondly, there's a very odd resettlement structure in the EU-Turkey deal, which is, while there should be dramatic resettlement out of Turkey and other hosting states of hundreds of thousands of refugees to other parts of the world as well as to the EU, the formula that was worked out was that for every refugee returned, one will be resettled. Well, if the plan worked and the boat stopped, there'll be very few returned, which means there'll be very few resettled. So the plan itself is not adequate to the kind of massive resettlement out of Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan that's needed. Thirdly, it's very unlikely the EU countries will agree on visa liberalization, which is the most important part of the deal from the Turkey perspective. And from Turkey's perspective, the 6 billion euros haven't arrived yet either, which is crucial to the deal. And lastly, even if the deal were successful in terms of stopping the flow from Turkey to Greece, people will find other ways to go. Already there's been an increase in people traveling, again, across the Mediterranean to Italy. There'll be pressures in other ways. So the deal that should have happened was a deal of really very large resettlement out of Turkey, with people waiting in Turkey for resettlement opportunities, additional aid, and an EU system which we can talk about later, but that's not the deal that was put together. And as I said, I think it's likely the deal will not hold. Third and last point, if I still have a minute, Mr. Moderator, this shouldn't be an EU-Turkey deal in any event. The Convention on the Status of Refugees makes clear that there's an international responsibility for responsibility sharing. And so the handling of 4 million Syrian refugees, or 2.7 million in Turkey, is not an issue of the EU and Turkey. It should be an issue of the global community as a whole. And in other times there have been comprehensive plans of action when the countries of the world have come together to solve a problem. That hasn't happened in the Syria situation. UNHCR sponsored a conference in March seeking additional resettlement slots. It was not successful in terms of increasing resettlement. But the major powers of the world, with the UN, should be calling for a global conference on Syrian refugees, of which the EU would be an important part, but it wouldn't be left up to the EU and Turkey to solve the problems. So again, I think coming out of the World Humanitarian Summit, and for the summit that will be happening in New York in September on large movements of refugees and migrants, there needs to be a fundamental rethinking and specification of the methods of global responsibility sharing, which are gestured at in the convention, but a framework, a really solid framework, is not developed for how that should occur. So every refugee flow ends up being with an ad hoc response, which is very strange after 60 years of UNHCR's existence and the international refugee regime and the convention. We still have ad hoc responses at the international level about how to handle these flows, and I'm hoping that what comes out of, as I said, this summit and the summit in the fall will be a push for a much broader, better, more firm understanding of what global responsibility ought to be, which then would reduce the burden on Turkey, reduce the burden on the EU, and spread that. And I must say, my own home country, the United States of America, really has been absent in this situation. And I think without U.S. leadership, it's unlikely to have a real, a successful kind of global approach to the problem. Thank you.
You still have 45 seconds, actually. Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you very much. And now I pass the floor to Elif Selenay. As I said, she is the head of Istanbul Field Office of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees.
Thank you very much. Chairperson, honorable speakers of the panel and distinguished guests. It's our utmost pleasure to have this opportunity to speak in this significant event, and we are confident that the panel will lead to a fruitful discussion. With the hopes of achievement through a political solution in the future, currently the situation in Syria continues to affect millions of lives. Over 4.7 million people have fled Syria since 2011, seeking safety in Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, Egypt, Turkey, and beyond, while more than 7 million have been displaced internally in Syria as the war continues. Turkey has always been at a central position in refugee movements due to its historical and geographical situation. Affected by the Syrian humanitarian crisis, Turkey now stands as the world's most refugee hosting country, followed by Pakistan and Lebanon. As of May 2016, the number of registered Syrian nationals under temporary protection regime has reached to 2.7 million, with 264 persons residing in camps in 10 provinces in 26 camps in Turkey, while 2.4 million are living in the urban. Additionally, Turkey hosts more than 300,000 refugees from Afghanistan, Iraq, and other countries. And to date, the Turkish government has spent more than $10 billion in response to the Syrian refugee emergency. However, needless to say, the pain of these uprooted people cannot be explained by numbers and statistics. Under the regional and global leadership of UNHCR as the lead agency in all matters related to refugees, and UN and its partners continue to implement the Regional Refugee and Resilience Plan, 3RP, to support the government of Turkey's protection and assistance response to meet the needs of refugees and host communities in 2016. Currently, UNHCR co-leads 3RP with UNDP in protection, education, basic needs and health sectors. In short, the 3RP aims at strengthening the national capacity with the refugee response plan to address the immediate needs and resilience response components, to address the medium and long-term needs while seeking active engagement of development partners and private sector. Meanwhile, UNHCR continues to underline the importance of international solidarity through financial support and responsibility sharing through resettlement. To date, the UNHCR Turkey has donated $3 million to the Turkish government. In scope of 3RP, 4 objectives have been defined in terms of UNHCR's planned achievements, which are access to territory and effective protection under a legal framework, identification of vulnerable groups and empowerment, self-reliance and age gender diversity mainstreaming, mitigation of the risks and consequences of GBV, gender-based violence experienced by women, girls, boys and men in improvement of access to quality services, more equitable access to child protection interventions for girls and boys affected by the crisis. Accordingly, in light of strong ownership and leadership of refugee issues at the national level, UNHCR works in full support of the efforts of Turkey to respond to the refugee situation in providing technical and material support to the government of Turkey for protection-sensitive registration system, vulnerable identification, supporting community self-management, representation and leadership in order to empower refugees whilst expanding outreach and information networks, strengthening national institutions and services, including the Minister of Family and Social Policies, Minister of Interior, and Minister of Health, to ensure access to assistance and services, including for the most vulnerable, and last but not least, in promoting access to the labor market, vocational and skills training, in cooperation with the authorities and the private sector. In scope of the aforementioned objectives, UNHCR has so far achieved in protection sector training of nearly 7,000 government officials in Turkey and relevant stakeholders on international refugee law, sexual and gender-based violence prevention and response, child protection, supporting establishment and continuous supporting of 11 community centers throughout Turkey. assisting more than 47,000 children through 25 child-friendly spaces in camps, youth workers and volunteers and specialized services. More than 8,000 Syrians submitted for resettlement and establishment of 12 women and girls friendly safe spaces. We're coordinating and working very closely with the implementing and operational partner NGOs. Given the achievements and the objectives of 3RP, UNHCR has been and will continue to contribute to the collective efforts for urban refugees in areas of education, self-reliance, as well as to address the needs of most vulnerable, while strengthening outreach by promoting empowerment and self-reliance, while identifying vulnerable refugees for referral and assistance. This will be supplemented with community-based protection through establishment of outreach centers across Turkey and continuous capacity building of partners, including Provincial Directorate for Migration Management, municipalities, bar associations, and other relevant parties. Despite the achievements, there is still a long way to go to overcome existing gaps manifested in a number of areas. First and foremost, in order to prevent a future lost generation, education still remains the first area to address for Syrian children, since many children does not attend school due to language barriers, xenophobia, child labor, war trauma, and so forth. UNHCR will be providing more than 1,000 scholarships for higher education this year. Furthermore, refugee women remain at risk for various reasons, including but not limited to lack of means in economic self-sufficiency, which sometimes result in early marriages, domestic violence and other protection concerns. Moreover, challenges in finding work and obtaining a legal permit exacerbates the already existing livelihood prospects of Syrian refugees, which are in return manifested as a serious level of poverty. This not only undermines the living conditions of refugees in a foreign country, but also hinders their hope for future. Last but not least, obstacles before harmonization with the host community caused by existing social discomforts and lack of social cohesion due to a number of factors such as language barrier and so on, still denies harmonization with host population, which have recently started to be addressed as the nature of the crisis has turned into a protracted one from an emergency situation. This year, UNHCR will continue to support refugee outreach volunteers and increase meaningful participation of refugees to decision-making process. With all of the achievements so far, the challenges ahead remain to be addressed in the spirit of international solidarity to meet the needs of persons in need of international protection, seeking shelter and safety outside of their country to rebuild their lives in dignity. Thank you very much for listening.
I'm very impressed regarding time. You still have 2 minutes 45 seconds, so you can use this. Okay. Now I pass the floor to Burcuhan Şener. She's an international cooperation expert from Marmara Belediyeler Birliği or Union of Marmara Municipalities. Please.
Hello everyone, thank you. Well, I'm going to talk about the local level of this refugee issue today. I'm going to try to explain what the municipalities are doing.
Microphone.
Okay. I think that's better. So I'm going to just briefly explain how we get the data from the municipalities. We've been working under this migration policy workshop that we recently set up actually. So the two main researches that we have done under this workshop is, one of them is the workshop that we done with UNHCR actually, the role of municipalities for refugees in urban settings, and the second thing is that we are still conducting research together with the municipalities in Istanbul. It's on municipal services with regard to Syrian refugees in the pilot area of Istanbul. So I'm going to explain actually the data we gathered, we are still gathering through these programs. Firstly, if I need to mention the challenges that municipalities see in the field, we can mention the most the biggest challenge as the language barrier, the communication problem with the refugees, between the refugees and the host communities, and also with the municipalities. So this is the main challenge for the municipalities to communicate them at the first place, because it avoids the access to rights, to services, and also it is a problem in terms of social harmony and social integration with the host communities. I'm not going to mention language barrier in all the other dimensions, so I'm going to just quickly pass through the other ones. In terms of legal constraints and uncertainties, one of the most challenges that municipalities are facing is the financial resources, because they don't have any extra budget for their services on the refugees. The second thing is that there is kind of a limbo in the municipal law, but still municipalities, at least how they describe it, say that in Article 13 of the municipal law, there is this fellow townsman law. It says that municipalities are actually obliged to provide services for the residents of the district the municipalities locate. So it doesn't refer to any citizenship. It covers all the people, all the residents living in the district of the municipality. With this law, with this article, the municipalities are able to actually provide services for these. But this applies for the registered Syrians. For the non-registered ones, municipalities still have some problems to provide services. In terms of education, there is a problem in the content and the methodology of the education, because, as you know, there are both Turkish schools that Syrian refugees can actually attend, and which they are already attending, and there are also education centers, kind of Syrian schools that they are attending to. So there is this dual approach in education, actually, because in Syrian schools we see amended Syrian curriculum in Arabic, but they also see Turkish training courses. But in Turkish schools, as you know, the educational language is in Turkish, so we have still this dual approach in the schools. There is also need for trainings for the instructors, because they need both pedagogical formation, and also it is kind of hard to actually teach Turkish to Arabic spoken people. So it needs another formation for the instructor too. Another problematic area is the supervision, of course, who is going to supervise them, the schools and etc., all the content and the curriculum. Regarding the health issue, again, we see that refugees are having trouble in access to medication and services. We also have the problem that some of the child diseases that terminated before by vaccination campaigns in the past decades started to emerge again. So, especially in the children's disease, child diseases, we see some diseases that re-emerged during the last 2 years, actually. Another thing is the concerns of the local residents due to the overcrowdedness and lack of capacity medical centers. We refer to the hospitals because of the refugees, because of the overcrowdedness coming from the refugees. Some of the local residents had some concerns and negative reactions to the situation, that they need to wait maybe more in the hospitals to get registration, etc. Another problem is, of course, the lack of psychosocial assistance for trauma survivors, which is still a hard issue. Economic challenges. There is a difficulty in identifying the incomes of the refugees, because mostly they are not still working formally, they are working in informal sectors, especially in textile sectors in Istanbul. So it's still hard to identify the incomes. There is price escalation in most of the areas that refugees are populated mostly. And in terms of the working and social insurance, we still have the cheap labor problem, because interpreters actually choose Syrian refugees to work them, to pay them less salaries than the Turkish local residents. So this may lead to exploitation of the Syrian refugees in this sense. As I said, again, the informal employment may lead to unfair competition between the Turkish enterprises. Child labor started to emerge again in the last years. Again, we see the negative reactions of the local residents to employment of Syrian refugees because some of them think that they are actually stealing their job, which is not so true because Syrian refugees are actually working in a very low-level jobs, but still how the local residents see it is in this aspect. Work permits, we don't have this problem anymore, but still we see the effects of the previous lack of work permits. Elif Selena knows it probably better the numbers of how many people actually get the work permits, but it's starting to get better. Before that, there was actually this aid-dependent lifestyle of refugees because they were not able to work with permits. Regarding accommodation, we have the problem of increase in rents because mostly more than one family share one house. It's like maybe 4 families sharing one house. It leads to the increase in the rents of the houses, which also affects local residents, of course. And it is also so hard to track the mobilization of the refugees because they mobilize non-registered and also so quickly that it's so hard to track them. Social problems, we can mention lots of them actually, I just put some of them. Exploitation of refugees in terms of begging in the streets and prostitution, etc. We have, of course, the problem of polygamy and early marriage because of cultural differences, and problem of civil marriage, which is not possible in Turkey. Social reflexes, there is still no mass reaction from the public, from the local residents, but there is still potential of this reaction because of all the provocations and all the other problems that they have with the host communities because of the differences in cultures, lifestyles, and because of the assistance and the employment of refugees, basically. Another problem is the ghettoization, which creates actually security concerns. Syrian refugees mostly prefer living together actually in the same neighborhoods, same areas, which leads to ghettoization and creates security problems for the local residents. Some other challenges that we can mention actually is the problem of non-registration because of the long waiting periods for the applications of registrations. Some of the Syrians are still not able to get registered. This, as I told before, this creates some problems in terms of the municipal services that need to be provided to the refugees because the municipalities think that they cannot provide refugees if they are not provide assistance if they are not registered. We see still potential of higher crime and also connection with criminal syndicates. Multi-source and repeating social assistance because of the lack of coordination between different stakeholders. We don't know who is helping who. We have this problem of lack of communication among the stakeholders that we need to address urgently. And we still don't know how to call them actually. Are we going to call them guests or refugees? We are still not sure about this because of this ambiguity. Also, some of the institutions or stakeholders don't know so how to approach them. Just quickly to mention some of the municipal services that are provided by the municipalities. All kinds of actual assistance is provided. Yeah, I'm out of time, right? I have 2 more minutes. Okay, thank you. Yeah, from you. We can just mention a couple of them like food, clothing, household goals, housing benefits, heating, school kits, baby food, medical aid, and wheelchairs. Some of them are like this. Some of the municipalities are also providing financial aid, while some others don't. Transportation, for instance, when they want to go to hospitals, some of the municipalities are providing transport to the hospitals and some translators with them actually. They are doing advocacy. Some of the municipalities are also providing language courses and vocational courses for the refugees. They also guide the refugees to relevant institutions such as DGMM and police. Lastly, we can just conclude that we can just maybe understand that they're going to stay here. They will be permanently staying here, and that's why we need the needs assessment, both in terms of local governments and refugees. We need, as I said, we need coordination among other stakeholders. In this way, we can see who is helping to whom, and we can coordinate our actions better to get better results. Actually, pooling of resources. This is the suggestion directly coming from the municipalities that municipalities can disseminate some flyers in Arabic that can help and guide refugees to relevant bodies. We need to include them in education, in social life, in economy somehow. I already mentioned the vocational courses, training courses, pedagogical formation for the instructors. And we need also actually some assistance from the universities, because there are already some institutions giving these training courses, language courses, for instance, public education centers and foundations, but they don't have enough capacity in terms of instructors, etc. So we can also ask for some assistance from the academy and universities, their language centers. We need to direct the municipalities to use national and international funds and encourage project-based financial assistance from these NGOs mostly. And we need to create a common ground to live together and organize some joint events, not just for Syrian refugees, but to bring them together with the local residents. Only in this way we can help the social harmony and integration between the two communities. And we need to ensure the sustainability, which creates a great system from the top, actually, which is the municipality's idea too, because you really need a strategic decision and system coming from the top, not only from the local level. So this is my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. And now I pass the floor to Emel Kurma. She is from former Helsinki Citizens Assembly, because we just changed our name, and this is not the first occasion. But anyway, Emel will discuss about how human security approach may be applied to refugee issues. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll try to follow a trail on not what needs to be done, but what is really happening on the ground, and not on paper and not on administrative adoption of improvements, whatever, what's really happening. And we'll try to concentrate on the response of civil society, mostly in Turkey, but also in a transborder level. We actually, on ethical political terms, dropped the Helsinki suffix from our name, but you could probably, even with that, you could describe us best as a group of citizens transborder or sans frontières, like the medicines, Doctors Without Borders, who pulled out of this summit. And here's the statement. I don't have the time nor the mandate to read it, but if you are curious why MSF pulled out of the summit, this is where you can find it. So there's a huge variety of NGOs in this, from international NGOs to local NGOs to informal groups to solidarity groups to local civic initiatives, grassroots-based organizations who popped out just to respond to the crisis emanating from the refugee flow, Syrian refugee flow, which added up to the flow of refugees which have been passing through Turkey and the Balkans, Mediterranean and Aegean for years already. We are seeing a lot of implications of the flux of refugees and the issues and the problems that are emanating from that, and our system is not wired to respond to needs of security, a human-centered security. In different varying levels, states, by their own rigging, are mostly concerned with state security and with border security, whereas citizens of the world, we are more concerned. So in our book, it's not a refugee or a citizen in formal terms, citizens in dire situations, or those who are already settled and not need to run. So discussing, before we pass on to, discussing the dynamics of civic involvement in responding to the issues and challenges associated with the flux of Syrian refugees or migrants. I should maybe ask, do we have any Syrian refugees in this room? I expected so, regrettably so. The UN coined the word of human security in 1994. It's been 2 years ago. It's been, time passes. 2 years ago, it was the 20th anniversary of the concept of human security as described in main life courses like economic, food, health, environmental, personal, community, political, free speech and all the rights and civil rights and political rights are part of human security. So in a sense, it's a socioeconomic, ecological safety, civic, cultural, political rights and freedoms, actually our trust in each other across society or societies, which is our basic security in that sense. So UN started up this. In that perspective, if you look at humanitarian aid, it is a charity, donation-led policy, if you might say so, or a remedy for perpetuated inequality, discrimination, exclusion, exploitation, addressing consequences and not really the changes that need to be done in the structure and the system. Moreover, in that approach, the individual or the community, the refugees in our case, are seen or situated as recipients of aid, as passive, objectivized recipients of aid, unable to have the means or at least the inclusion in the decision making, in the policy making regarding their own rights. And of course the rights of the host communities as well, or the fears or anxieties addressing both mutually. Whereas human security looks into the integrity, dignity, physical, social, political, psychological, well-being, safety of people, individually and collectively, but also conviviality, our social fabric to be able to live together. And that requires a lot of political will, and not only just civic support. It requires a lot of policy making. In that sense, the human security approach also considers those which are affected to have a say of their own lives, which means they are also equal stakeholders in policy making, formulation and implementation, with an agency and capacity to handle the problems, their own problems and the associated problems, and without a perpetuated structural dependency of the purely humanitarian approach, which results on the goodwill, which is not resting upon any structural political commitments or resource allocation or changing the whole. Of course, it's difficult to change the whole thing at once, but not moving in that direction. So it's time already, not only for Turkey, for European countries and for other countries as well, to realize that we are past beyond the point of return, and all these people will need to eventually be included, integrated into wherever they are now. We know, for instance, from Sultanbeyli municipality, on the other side, we know that although even if it's a dream, even if it's just wishful thinking, the Syrian refugees want to go back if there's some means to do it. One of the striking things that they shared with us in a meeting is they want to go back. The second reason is because that the kids here behave very badly to their kids. So the work we need to do does not necessarily address and only address the refugees. This is why not only civil society but also states, municipalities, whatever, have to work on the host community, the recipient teachers, the schools, the neighborhoods, whatsoever. We are afraid, and we have started to see an increase not only in the Balkans but very, very severely in Turkey, which is going from bad to worse in xenophobic and racist bodies. But in the meanwhile, you are also, from this information in the field, you would like to see some things changed on administrative public system. Well, therein comes the problem. If you're too critical of the system, And if you want to really see an accountable, transparent system which is proceeding according to criteria with the inclusion of stakeholders and refugees in the first place, then you're going to have a critical voice. But that critical voice, and I can tell from the context of Turkey, will not give you a carte blanche in providing the services wherever you want, as much as you want, and not according to preset, open and transparent criteria. International NGOs from the beginning of the crisis had a very long, difficult time to get accredited, to provide services, to register, whatever. Eventually this happened. The current political atmosphere in Turkey provides more leeway to a certain group of NGOs who will have more access to camps whatsoever, or more access to resources, or I don't know, other refugee-related issues and work, would have easier permission processes, if there is a permission process at all. Whereas rather independent NGOs, and who are not just on a charity line, whatever, will have a difficulty to do work and to prepare the host communities and to address also associated issues, including the municipalities and others. There's a widespread perception among civil society that many NGOs have increased their capacity in Turkey to run and manage project-based grants. But we should all be reminded that seeing the world as interconnected projects, or from project to project base, is a very, very detrimental to seeing the bigger picture and to act politically for change. This is, when you act for change, you are actually acting politically. When you want to have a say over the allocation of resources, the procedure of the allocation of resources, you are definitely in the terrain of politics. And this is where being a stakeholder counts. So I think I'll cut it here. If there are further questions, I'll be happy to explain further how a genuine intervention and involvement of civil society in Turkey has been so far eclipsed. I'll
Okay, thank you very much to all speakers. Very, very briefly, Alex told us that basically a structural change is needed at the moment in terms of how we respond to the crisis or situation, because it's not just a few hundred people coming from one place going to another. They are permanent. And then we heard from Serenay the UNHCR activities in the field and the challenges that they face. And basically she listed education, employment and harmonization with the local community as fundamental challenges that they face, or other operations perhaps face in the field. And then Burjuhan told us municipal work in the field, and again she listed several challenges that the communities or the municipalities face. Some of them are education, access to education, language, healthcare, again access, trauma. This is a very critical issue. Trauma, care, economic challenges, very obvious. Access to employment, almost slavery in certain markets, child labor, exploitation. Accommodation is another major challenge, and social problems such as prostitution, early marriages, polygamy, begging, and so on and so forth. And Emel tried to introduce the issue from a human security concept, which is defined by UN initially, and she provided an insight in a paradigm shift sort of in how we approach these matters. I believe all these four presentations made a good flow and provided different aspects of the issue. Now we have 36 minutes to leave the room. This is how we were instructed. If you want, I can give the floor again to panelists for 2 minutes each if they want to respond to other speakers, or we can directly pass to the Q&A session. Okay. All right. So, please, I would request you to tell your name, and if you are representing any NGO or anybody, tell this, and then please your comment or input or question. The floor is open. Sir, please.
Do we have a mic?
Do we have a mic that is being circulated? Yeah.
Thank you. It was turned on.
Is it working?
Thank you, Chair. My name is John Oucho. I'm from Kenya, from the African Migration and Development Policy Center. This is a very interesting intervention from the panelists. There are two things which concern me here. One is the disconnect between signing and ratifying refugee conventions and the practice on the ground. That is the programs. And I think we need some research to inform us about this. Because a lot of things that are being done to refugees are, maybe to say the least, are not well intended. The second concern is about xenophobic tendencies towards refugees. Again, which some of these things are because the citizenry have no clue what are the conventions, what are some of the provisions that government ought to meet towards the refugees. And on the other hand, you'll find also that refugees sometimes have been misused in national politics, and especially in Africa. Refugees are very useful when it comes to balancing the national voting, and very unpopular when the vote has been won. And we have seen recent examples in some of our countries. So I think one of the pleas I think I should make is that we should continue to constantly search for what should be done in the future in terms of understanding the refugees and having them actually have a voice to express some of their concerns. I'm not surprised that there are many civil society organizations on refugees, because it's one of the areas in which some of the civil societies make their own funds. But I think apart from just funds, we need tangible contribution. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody want to respond, or shall we continue with the questions? Okay. First you, and then you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thanks to all the panelists. My name is Philip Objusu. I'm from the African Union Commission. I was very much intrigued by the comments of the panelists. I want to look at this issue from a different angle. I work on migration issues, and I'm very much interested in the relationship, interface between the government of Turkey and the European Union. And I'm very happy that the first speaker alluded to that, being very critical, which is a position I share, simply because there are two issues here. One is the sincerity of the European Union in addressing this issue. How sincere are they? And I'm very much particular about this point because we are talking about what is happening in Europe today. There's a clash of values, which is European values, the values of human rights, the values of freedom, the values of democracy, and prejudice. There's a clash of values and prejudice. Prejudice against foreigners, prejudice against anybody that does not look like us, and prejudice against fear, which is the situation we are in. Syrians, Afghans, all refugees coming to Europe, including Africans, because there are a lot of Africans coming, are looked upon as the other half. And for me, this is disheartening, because in my line of duty, I'm talking about human rights, I'm talking about democracy, issues of freedom, etc. And these are values we learned from Europe. These are the European values we spread to the world. Particularly the issue of Syria, and I very much sympathize with the Syrian refugees. This is because in this region, history has shown us that conflicts do not end easily. The Syrians, and this is to their credit, 4 or 5 years ago when this conflict started, Syrians were in Lebanon, in Jordan. They did not want to go anywhere because they were living very well in their home countries, hoping that the situation would end. But the Syrians have seen Palestinians in refugee camps for decades. Even before some of us were born, they have been in refugee camps for decades. Without fear in their mind. If I was a Syrian, I have to take it on myself to leave, because I know that the future of my children are at stake. My own future is at stake. So I have to look for solace somewhere. This is the situation. So going back to the point that the first speaker made, we don't need an EU-Turkey agreement. We need a global agreement. How do we ensure that we seek alternative pathways, not only for Syrians, but for all refugees? Because even as I speak, there are millions of Africans that are refugees in Ethiopia, in Kenya, in Sudan, everywhere. So whilst we are looking for a solution, let us ensure that we look for a solution that is comprehensive, that is inclusive. Thank you very much.
My name is Gülay Göksay from Istanbul University. I'm going to ask a comprehensive question.
Just to the point question.
I was
wondering what's happening with the unaccompanied Syrian refugee children and their rights, because it is true that the refugees and their rights are completely on the hands of the host communities.
But when it comes to children, it becomes more complicated, and their fate is completely and randomly decided by the government and government officials. And this is an issue which should be on top of our list, but I don't hear anyone talking about it, so I just want to ask.
Thank you very much for your question. Yes, there are unaccompanied minors and separated children, not only Syrians but also from other nationalities, especially Afghans. And the child protection law in Turkey is giving a really good space for the protection of those children. And for example, in Istanbul, there are 6 different child institutions managed by the government, and they are admitted to these places, and UNHCR is also referring unaccompanied minors to these centers. And we're following up their cases, asylum applications, and also their well-being are taken care of by the social workers of the state. On the other hand, the children, Syrian children over 13 years old, with an administrative regulation, are sent to Adana Sarıçam camp. Actually, and Minister of Family, we have been talking with the Minister of Family and Social Policies, and we have conveyed our concerns that the gender-based, victims of gender-based violence or vulnerable children and unaccompanied minors are already vulnerable groups for us. There should be certain safeguards for their protection, because Turkey is party to Convention on Right to Child, and also they have a very comprehensive law, a national law, which stipulates that children under 18, regardless of their nationality, should be protected, and this best interest determination is also taking place in the law, national law. So this is something that we are advocating, but in the meantime we have been hearing that lots of unaccompanied Syrian children are missing, and this is very important for us, and this is one of the goals that we are trying to achieve, the protection of unaccompanied minors, Syrian unaccompanied minors in Turkey and other regions. But the law, the national framework is there, but the implementation is very important. So we are advocating for the well-being of these children. We already have some Syrian children living and placed in child institutions in Istanbul and other places, by the way.
But they are being sent to the other, right? So
if they're over 13 years old, unfortunately they are sent to those places, and inside the camp the social workers of the Ministry of Family and Social Policies are deployed, and they're working there, establishing a kind of child-friendly space. But we have raised our concerns about the standards of those places. Yeah, thank you.
It's a very good question indeed, and I think accompanied minors as well constitute a matter. The arbitrary entrance or monitoring or access of NGOs into camps, into independent NGOs into camps, not as for policing, just to help and see. This is very critical in the protection of unaccompanied minors in state institutions, and Turkey is already very, very problematic in its child care through the public system. We are seeing a lot of sad, tragic stories from sexual harassment to other things, so Turkey's capacity is already quite low. So what I think civil society expects from the government is to be open and honest about the failings in the system and to set out clear procedures, accountability, whatever, so that others can fill in the blanks as much as they can. The problem with Turkey has been, obviously a lot of good things have been done, but I think the closing of the failures or shortcomings is to the detriment of refugee security, accompanied minors, unaccompanied minors, women, and the rest.
One more addition, we also have some reports, especially from Antep and the surrounding region, that children, especially from certain ethnic groups, Domari, Gypsies, etc., when they're back on the street, they are taken away from the families and put into the camps. And in most cases, the families do not approve that, but they are separated. We have several reports about this. There's a discriminatory practice targeting certain religious and ethnic groups when providing health services and protection. I said this is a major problem also. Okay.
Mr. Buzak, I'm also working for Helsinki Students' Assembly. Merkulma has lasted her speech with mentioning that there are certain eclipses concerning the humanitarian aid of Turkey. I would like to ask her what sort of eclipses she is talking about, and what are the difficulties that the refugees from Syria faces in the camps, and what could be done to better the conditions in those camps, especially the difficulties concerning the NGOs that are willing to give aid to those refugees.
Hey, my name is Hakan Ataman. I'm from also Helsinki Students' Assembly. I have a question, Professor Alex, is actually, as you know, is that there are many critics about the EU and Turkey deal made by the human rights organization and activists as well as humanitarian organization. And one of them is focusing on the concept of the safe third country. What is your opinion or your approach to this concept? Can we say Turkey is third safe country for refugees, or is the Turkey safe country for refugees in general? Thank you very much.
Also, maybe to follow up, as you know, yesterday or the day before, a Greek court ruled that Turkey is not a safe country. So, if you can combine your response.
But I'd ask. I'm sorry you didn't direct that to the EU, to the UNHCR representative, but you might have put it in a very difficult situation if you had. So I'll try to answer as a former UNHCR official. I mean, I think we have to distinguish safe country as a term of art from the general way we think about it. I mean, Turkey is the largest refugee hosting country in the world. We've said that. It's remarkable, the welcome, with all the difficulties that have been described here. Nonetheless, 2.7 million people have been able to escape horrible violence in their home country and live here. And that is something worth celebrating, the welcome that Turkey has extended. Now, it doesn't mean there aren't things that can be improved in that response and ways of working it through. But that fact alone, the granting of asylum to 2.7 million people, is a very important part of the international refugee regime. The law that applies in the EU, both under EU law and European law through the European Court of Human Rights, has its own logic and its own norms and its own procedures. So there will be decisions under EU law, and actually by the Greek authorities here, that may well say that under the standards applied in the EU law, that basically says the country must live up to all the aspects of the convention and various sets of human rights. And of course, as you know, Turkey is a signatory to the convention, but still has the geographical limit, so it only really applies to European refugees, and European courts may say that's not good enough and therefore we can't send people back. That doesn't mean that Turkey is not a safe place for people to seek asylum, that they will be persecuted in Turkey. It simply means that they have not met the standards that the EU has adopted itself in terms of thinking about whether people can return. So I think you have to separate out those questions.
Jennifer Larby, I work for the Labour Party in the UK, and I wanted to thank all the speakers for their really interesting contributions to this discussion. And I particularly wanted to pick up on the point made by Emil about not having any Syrians here to shape the discussion that we are having today. Before coming to this summit, I spent the day yesterday in Hatay with other colleagues, meeting with Syrian families, and I completely agree with your point. And speaking to some of the refugees who have settled in Hatay, they absolutely say that they want to go back to their country. They are very hopeful that things can improve, and they want to be part of those political solutions. And I think we need to challenge the narrative. In many of our countries, where I live in the UK, there is a narrative that refugees come along, are economic migrants, they want to come, they want to steal the jobs of people in the UK, they want to use our resources. And I think my experience yesterday speaking to those families, I know that I need to go back and challenge that narrative that is developing across Western Europe. And I was also reading the statement from MSF that you kindly pointed out as to why they're not engaging with this summit over the next few days. And I think it's really important that everybody in this room does read this statement, because I think it tells us that we are not putting enough pressure on nation states, advanced nation states in Western Europe, who I believe have absolutely relinquished their responsibility for supporting refugees and supporting people who are fleeing persecution. And I get the sense that the tone and the consensus from this room is that the EU-Turkey deal represents a legitimation of people, of countries relinquishing that responsibility. And I know it's a statement, not really a question, but I'll make it a question and ask the panel if they agree with that as well.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? Because we are approaching, we have just, anybody? No.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Dunn. I'm covering for the Boston Review. And it seems to me that you're asking for two contradictory things in this panel. One is that aid should be much more localized, and people who have on-the-ground experience should be able to provide aid that they know is needed. And on the other hand, there's a huge call for more coordination. And the more you localize, the harder coordination is. So how do you think you can reconcile these two imperatives?
Last answer? Please.
I think there are actually three things being asked for, and I'm not sure they're contradictory. I think it's widely recognized throughout the WHS documents that often local organizations, NGOs and others, are best able to know what the local condition and what the local needs are and how to meet them. So there's a huge sense in which assistance should go down to local communities to help deal at the local level. Secondly, and this responds to the previous question as well about the MSF statement, there's a recognition that it's not just humanitarian assistance that's needed. It's not just money for more blankets and shelter, but it's actually aid to the hosting community to include refugees in education and clinics and not set up parallel humanitarian systems as the humanitarian system has done for years and years and years and needs to stop doing and reduce its footprint so that this can be included. That will come with development dollars, which, by getting back to the MSF comment, I think they're actually wrong on this point. They said it's too much about development at the World Humanitarian Summit, if you read their comment. I think they're actually mistaken about that. I think the move to expanding the system to include development agencies is really important if we're going to really solve these long-term problems. And then the third level is the international level, where you need agreement, a broad level of global responsibility sharing, which says we're not going to mean it's just up to the 3 or 4 countries around Syria to host 4.7 million refugees. We're going to take several 100,000 into the United States and into Europe and into Australia and into Canada and around the world as a way to reduce the burden on the countries that have hosted. So those are different levels and different ways of expanding, but I don't see them as contradictory. I think the system has to be reformed in all those ways at the same time.
Well, I wouldn't say that it's actually contradictory between the localization of this issue and the central level. I would say that firstly, to localize this, you need a legal background and budgetary background too, because you need some extra budget and legal duties and roles for this. Once you have this system coming from the top, from the center, then you can provide all the services at the local level. This is the problem of the municipalities that are facing. Sometimes they might have some concerns because this is the last few years actually they are facing this kind of refugee inflow. That's why they don't know how to react maybe in some occasions. But I don't think that this is a contradictory situation between the central and the local level actually. Once you set up the system with the coordination between all the stakeholders, then you can provide the services and all the assistance at the local level very well.
Two things I also find them complementary, not contradictory. But I would say, referring to the previous comment on values or the reaction of host communities, they're reacting since they do not know the international compendia? No. Mostly the lower income groups of societies are most affected by an influx of refugees, whereas in Urfa in 2012, a daily wage worker earned about, at that day's currency rate, about 8-9 euros per day. After the influx of the Syrian refugees in a year, that had gone to 2 euros maximum per day for a local daily wage worker. So it is up to governments to balance out this and to compound the receptive, accommodating capacity of local communities. And it's a big challenge, sure, but if this planning, this policy formulation is not benefiting from the field knowledge, from the feedback, from the practice of those in the field, from NGOs to municipalities, to the refugees themselves, then we are only speaking of values which are not tied to the practice. And more dangerously, solidarity gets to be formulated along ethnic, religious, whatever, communitarian, sectarian lines. So we help our kin, they help their kin, whatsoever. And this is in the currently highly polarized political atmosphere of Turkey and a very, very volatile daily life in Turkey, including the ongoing Kurdish conflict and its rise. This is adding more and more to our problems. So it's not happening nowhere, of course, around the world in a void, but in Turkey, the whole issue is, the whole issue is a peace issue, a societal reconciliation issue, which needs to bring the regional, the country level to the local, and vice versa, in a complementary manner.
We have just 2 minutes. I was instructed to start at sharp 2:30. I don't know if we have any flexibility. So we just have 2 minutes. First, I want to turn to the panel and ask if there's any very burning, hot issue that you want to raise. Then to the audience, if there's any very hot, violent, whatever, if I don't say this, I will die kind of comment. If not, hopefully not. Okay. So, we try to discuss a very little segment of a huge issue here, and I would like to thank, on behalf of all of you, to all panelists for the excellent presentations. I hope we all benefited. I did myself, and maybe some new questions in our mind, as if we need more questions on the matter. I would like to thank our friends in the boxes trying to help us to communicate each other, and maybe applause for them for translation. And this is the end of our panel, not of end of the problem, unfortunately. We will probably meet several times again on the same topic, discussing different issues. And thank you for all of you for coming here and being with us today. Thank you. Bye-bye.